In her memoir, Made, Hard Work, Low Pay, and a Mother's Will to Survive, Stephanie Land chronicles her journey as a single mother, working for the wealthy to support herself and her daughter, while simultaneously earning a journalism degree. Netflix released a miniseries inspired by Stephanie Land's Made. During this hour-long episode, she speaks with Rachel Snyder, co-author of The Financial Diaries. This episode originally aired in January 2019. A note, we are taking a break for the next few weeks. During that break, we will be posting some episodes from our Afterwards archives.
Hello, Stephanie. I'm so glad to be able to have this conversation with you. I have to say, I just loved your book. I really did.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I'm looking forward to being able to hear more from you about why you wrote it, how the process worked for you, and all of the learnings that you have from this life experience. So I think what would be a great way to start is for you to share with the viewer what the basic story is. What is this book about?
Well, it's about a time that I lived with my then 3.5-year-old daughter in a studio apartment while I was cleaning houses full time. And I think the bulk of the book focuses on that time period when we lived in a very small environment that I could barely afford, and then spent most of my time in these really large houses cleaning them on my hands and knees for the most part. And a lot of the disenchantment process that I went through in realizing that the big house on the hill doesn't necessarily mean happiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that comes through really strongly and powerfully. You know, this book, it's a lot about poverty, right? It's a lot about what it means to struggle without enough money. But I felt like what came across so strongly was also very much a book about emotion and about how it feels to be struggling. And, you know, and so we'll get to the financial challenges. I think it's like there's a lot to say there and to understand. But the book is a lot about your emotional journey, right? And so I wonder if you could share with us a little bit more about how that time felt for you.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is definitely bewilderment. Just not really understanding what was going on. But I also felt very marooned and isolated and very alone. And alone in a way that is kind of all-encompassing. Like I didn't have anything to fall back on. And through all of that process, I think I learned to rely and depend on myself, which was empowering and strengthening, but also very hard. I'm still that way. You know, like, the only person I have to depend on is really myself. And so I think, you know, that has caused me to not ask for help from others, which has been detrimental, I think. And I need to constantly remind myself that, like, I can actually ask for help. But a lot of that time period was I think disappointing and kind of sad at times, but strength building, I guess.
Yeah, I'm realizing we should probably go back and and say more about, like, you know, how you got to that place. So you, by the time we meet you in the book, you're already a mom, and I have to read the first sentence of the book because I think it's just such a powerful way to start. And you write, "My daughter learned to walk in a homeless shelter," and for me, like, that sentence is right, like, immediately about, like, it's learning to walk, right? It's not being stationary. It is mobile, but at the same time, you know, it took some hardship to get there. So, and maybe that's what the loneliness is about, right? So maybe you could share a little bit more about how you found yourself in that place.
Well, I got pregnant, obviously.
Right, clearly.
And, you know, at the time of deciding to continue with that pregnancy, I assumed that I would be supported by my family, by my daughter's father, because that I couldn't imagine not being supported. I couldn't imagine being in that place, in a homeless shelter. And like that didn't even seem like a possibility to me at the time. But throughout the next year and a half, I guess it was, by the time Mia was 8 months or so, 7 or 8 months, I had been in an incredibly emotionally abusive relationship with her dad and was very depressed from that. And our relationship was finally toxic enough that I couldn't stay. And he didn't want us to stay where he was living. So I went and lived with my dad and his wife, and that didn't work out either. And so ended up in a homeless shelter, because that was really the only place that I felt I could depend on, because I was already going back into that, like, I have to do this on my own. I can't keep bouncing us around and asking for places to stay. A homeless shelter was stability to me, and it was at least putting me on a path to having our own place.
Right. You know, it is so hard to ask for help, and to go in and ask for housing, to then go and ask for other forms of assistance. It's really difficult in so many ways. Can you talk more about what's broken in that system?
Oh,
I realize it's a big question, so I'll have some follow-ups, but you know, I think it'd be useful to hear where you start.
Well, I think, I mean, just, there's so many things. In just the application process. I mean, if you think about it, you need a computer, and you need a printer, you need access to the internet, you need a working phone, because a lot of times they'll call you and have an appointment through your telephone. And those appointments, the recertification or just an application process, are during the workday for most people. So you have to block out, you know, a good chunk of your afternoon to make that appointment. You need to bring proof of how much your car is, how much your rent is. You need to bring a utility bill to prove your address. These are all things that to most people, you know, really wouldn't be much of anything, but like if you're in transition like I was, if you might not have a utility bill to bring. And then there's also a lot of other catches where you need to have a job before you apply for childcare. And so if you already have a job, then you already need childcare. And then, so then you have to go through that application process while you're trying to figure out what to do with your kid while you're at work or applying, or there's so many things that I think most people don't even think about, because it's normal to them to fill out an online form. But for a person with nothing and no means, it's hard to get to a library or, you know, another place, and especially when your main focus is trying to work.
Right. Yeah, and in addition to just how logistically challenging it is, it sounded like there are also tons of places where the system that's in place makes assumptions about the people who need help in the first place, right? That pile on to the pain of having to go and ask for help in the first place, and make it even harder by assuming that you wrote about a class you had to take at some point. So like you should share that story.
Yeah, I had to learn how to approach landlords about my rent voucher. At the time, I was using a program called TBRA, which is tenant-based rental assistance, and then that puts you on a pathway to a Section 8 voucher. Section 8 it's like a unicorn of all the vouchers that they have. Many people aren't even accepting new applicants because the wait list in some places is 8 to 10 years long. And a lot of landlords don't like rental vouchers because the money comes at mid-month or something, but there's a lot of stigma involved. Landlords assume that if they have some kind of rental voucher, then they're going to trash the place, or they're going to leave it incredibly dirty, or there will be multiple families living. And I mean, all the stigmas surrounding low-income families are held in that rental voucher. And so the class was learning kind of a sales pitch of how to approach a landlord with it. And people in the class spoke up and said, like, you know, this isn't how it works. There's so much discrimination. And he didn't really even like discuss that with us. It was just all like looking at the positive points in trying to get a home with this voucher.
Right. You write at some point about one of the social workers that our caseworker who you dealt with through this process, saying you were lucky, right? Because there was a moment when there was a housing that was available that, you know, all the choices are bad, and among all the choices, this one you were lucky to get, right? And that you write about it in the book as being a noteworthy moment, like, how am I in this situation ever going to think of myself as lucky? But I wonder if you feel like that's consistent with this storyline of also needing to come to classes and also sort of being treated as less than because, or not as knowledgeable or dirty in some way, or because you just in fact need a little bit of help in this moment.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of assumptions that I was a drug addict, or, you know, trying to think that I wouldn't be able to do or complete normal house cleaning tasks, that, I don't know, I mean, I had a curfew of, you know, 10 p.m. In the transitional housing apartment we lived in. I had to ask to have overnight visitors, and I had to report my income constantly. I had to share my budget with people. I was constantly checked in on, and had to report anything that was going on within, you know, my job and daycare, and very much felt like I was kept tabs on in a way that is degrading and not normal to me at all.
No,
So.
and right, and to me it seems counterproductive to the whole, what I want to think the motivating vision behind public assistance of any kind should be, which would be to help somebody up, help somebody move on to the next phase. And yet it really comes across in your telling so powerfully that that you're checked in on all the time and yet still feel lonely, right? Still feel like moving yourself up or out of this situation is totally on you.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't like a checking in on, like, are you okay?
No.
It was, okay, we gave you this, and now you need to prove that you still need it again and again and again, like once a month. And, you know, I mean, they were just recently trying to pass legislation that food stamp recipients would have to turn in paperwork monthly to show that they had worked 20 hours a week. And it's just things like that boggles my mind. I mean, but it seems like not only are we getting, as poor people, you know, housing or food or childcare, it seems like it's a gift that we have to keep proving that we deserve. And it's a horrible thing to do to someone.
Yeah, right, horrible, and I think counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, especially with the paperwork to prove that you were working 20 hours a week for the when they were working through the SNAP reform this year. Imagine how much time that would take just on the worker level for someone who works for the Department of Health. They would have to hire new people just to handle this influx of paperwork. And in that shuffle, that paper could get lost. And they even wanted to take away the benefits of a person if they didn't hand in that piece of paper for a year. So say a piece of paper gets lost and suddenly you don't have food for your family for an entire year. And so it seems like they're not only asking you to prove that you deserve this help, they're kind of trying to backhandedly kick you off of it. So so when I think of a broken system, that's what I think of. It's a system that is setting you up to fail.
I think so too, and I think it's important to shine a spotlight on the specifics of it, because it's not until you hear the specific requirements like that you've just listed, right? Needing to prove again and again how much you earn, or needing to fill out forms again and again when you don't live a place where that's easy. Those specifics makes it very real for those of us who've never had this experience, and I think are really powerful and important to share. At the same time, and I think that's one of the really powerful parts of your book. I also, though, think that, you, through it all, seem to be able to maintain some idea that you could change it, right? And I'd love to hear more about that, like your process of maintaining hope, which is really hard in the midst of all of these kinds of challenges. So what do you attribute that to? How do you think you were able to keep thinking at all about the long term?
Well, I mean, that was privilege. I mean, that was me not growing up in that situation. I mean, that was me growing up as a white person in the suburbs. And so my inner narrative was not, this is how my story ends. Mm-hmm. It was, it's going to get better eventually, because it has to, because that was my privileged position. And so I think there was a lot of that. But also, I wanted so much more for myself, and especially for my daughter. I wanted her to watch me pursue my dreams and succeed. So I kind of held myself accountable to that as well. But I mean, my family, like my mom was the first person in my family to go to college. We're not a wealthy family by any means, but compared to someone who grew up in systemic poverty for generations, they might not have had the same hope or even dreams. So I think a lot of that was just me starting off at a more privileged position than many people do.
It's interesting to hear you describe it that way, because what also comes across in your book is the idea, you write at some point, I think, I'm going to pull the exact sentence because it resonated so strongly to me. You talked about the idea that even dreaming seemed like something I couldn't afford.
Oh,
right?
That was, that was pertaining to a better place to live. But it was also that I didn't have time. Right. I would take breaks during homework to look on Craigslist for a different apartment for us to live in. And even that seemed indulgent. So I had so much work to do between the actual work I got paid for and the invisible work I did, just domestic work, keeping things clean, and then taking care of my kid, and then all the schoolwork that I did. I felt like there wasn't even time to dream about a house to live in on Craigslist. So.
C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast.
Yeah, I can see that, because you just described multiple full-time jobs at once.
Yeah, I had many jobs. So.
Yeah.
And then, applying for government assistance and keeping that going can be, there were weeks that I probably spent 5 to 10 hours a week making sure I had all the forms in place and correct and had all of my proof of income correct, and like a lot of my income came from self-employment eventually, and so it was hard to prove that I was doing that. I had to get copies of checks and notes from people I worked for saying that I did in fact work in their home. So yeah, I was busy.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds extremely busy. And yet eventually you did figure out how to dream for a bigger place, a nicer place, a safer place for you and your daughter. Tell us more about that. You did, it seemed like, have a clear vision for what you ultimately wanted. Did it feel clearer to you at the time?
Well, it was more a nagging thought, or, you know, I just always kind of heard in my head, like, this isn't what you wanted, like, remember what you wanted? Because I had planned to move to Missoula, Montana, months before I found out I was pregnant with Mia. So I think that still beckoned, you know, that life called to me. I don't know, that sounds kind of cheesy, but I never wanted to attempt it because the stakes were too high, and it was such a big deal and such a big dream for me. I didn't want someone to tell me that I couldn't have it or that I couldn't do it. And so for the longest time, I didn't even think about it. So it was kind of a nagging thought. And it took a lot to even try to talk about it, or, you know, especially with Mia's dad, because I had to get kind of his permission to relocate. And that's just hard.
Right. Yeah, so say more about that. Well, I have two directions, and we can come back to each of them in turn, but why Montana? Why did it just pulled you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Alaska, and I moved out of Alaska with the intention to move to Montana somewhere, because I had read Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck, and the way that he talked about Montana was like, okay, I can see myself living there. Because Alaska is like the ultimate place. I wanted to find something that was really close to Alaska. And so I came down, I was staying in Washington, in Port Townsend. I just kind of thought that would be like a jumping pad to wherever I ended up in Montana. And I went to a book signing by David James Duncan, who's my favorite living author. And he said he lived in Lolo, Montana, and sometimes taught at the University of Montana in Missoula. And so I was like, oh, okay, so I'm going to go to Missoula then. And started applying, or filled out interest forms for the college there, and was about to send in the application form when I found out I was pregnant with Mia. So that was delayed for 6 years. So.
Right, delayed, but it was always out there for you, that's where you were headed.
Yeah, I wanted to stay in that area because I wanted to be around my family. I wanted Mia to grow up with grandparents and aunts and uncles and big holiday dinners. And the more and more that seemed to not be happening, and the more I felt like my family was kind of turning their back on me, the easier it was to envision us moving to a place that I didn't know anybody.
Right, if you're going to be lonely at home, you might as well be lonely where you envision yourself being happier.
Yeah. And I kept meeting people who were from Missoula and just feeling like a connection, or like we were kind of alike in some way. And I don't know, it got to the point where anybody that I was talking to that like I immediately felt drawn to, they had some kind of Missoula connection. So it was kind of weird like that too.
Right. And has Missoula been what you thought it would be? How long have you been there now?
I've been there 7 years, a little over 7 years.
A spoiler alert for readers, like she does make it.
Well, it's in my bio, so I mean.
That's true. So I didn't just ruin it.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So 6 years, you said.
7 years. Yeah. Been there for a long time, and it's great. I love the community there. There's a huge community of writers, obviously. Well, to me, that's obvious. Maybe not to everybody else, but and the university has been incredibly supportive. It was a was a good decision. It proved to be a good decision.
That's good. And how about writing? You also seem to know you wanted to be a writer, or did that come about later? How did you know you wanted to write?
That started like when I was 10. I had a 4th grade teacher who made us keep journals, and we had to write all these short stories. Like everything was writing, and so I discovered that I liked it, and I think after that was all I really imagined myself being. But it was kind of in I'll grow up and be a writer someday. Growing up meaning like in my 50s, or like I thought I'd settle down and become a writer at some point. Because, ultimately it's a career that doesn't pay very much. So I
Right.
figured like I'd need some kind of day job, live like an interesting life, and then eventually settle down and start writing about it. So that was my vision. I found a way to do it a little bit sooner, I guess.
Right. You did live an interesting life quite early, in a way. Right?
Yeah, that's true. Not purposefully, but yeah, the interesting life happened a lot earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so tell us more about the process of writing this book. What was that like for you?
I wrote it straight through. That was one thing that I did that was weird, that I'm glad I did, but I don't know if I would recommend it. I didn't look back at anything. I just had one Word file. I have an 11-inch MacBook Air that I wrote this whole entire book on. And I now need glasses because I think.
That makes sense.
But no, I had a counter on this whiteboard that, so I kept track of how many words I had written, and wrote it pretty quickly in just a few months. And because I, again, had a very privileged position in being able to do that, and spent probably a year editing and revising it and reading it over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So it was a good long year of writing and editing and living in that story.
Right. And did it feel like you were going back to? I'm curious if it felt like how it felt to go back and live in your story again. Memoir is such a particular thing, right? You're telling your own story, but you're also reflecting on your story.
Yeah. Well, I had to quit my day job because I'm normally a freelancer and write about economic justice mainly, and to do that I need to pay attention to the news, which I couldn't do anymore. So I kind of had to clear my plate, and if I wasn't writing, then I was looking at pictures or writing it out. I tried to do it almost completely from memory. And didn't go back and read any blog posts or journal entries or anything like that. I figured anything that stuck out in my mind would stick out in the reader's mind as well. So for the first draft, it was mostly just looking at pictures and trying to get the emotions from that. But living in the story, I think didn't really change until I was revising it. And went back and read parts and realized how hard that life was and how horribly hard it was. And I don't think I really realized that until that point. And looking back on that time and that version of myself, I suddenly had so much compassion for her. And it changed a lot of the way that I feel about myself now, even, because that time always felt like an extreme failure for me. Like I'd failed to give Mia the life that I wanted for her. I, had failed at so many things during that time, as far as just being a mother is concerned. But I realized through the editing and going deeper and deeper and deeper into the story, like, oh, that was actually really hard. Like, good job.
Yeah, that's good. I'm so glad to hear you, like, as a reader, right? So when you read somebody's story like this, you feel invested. I feel like I know you in a way that I don't know you, right? Because when you write memoir, you're sharing so much of yourself. So I feel really glad for you that that's where you are. Certainly as a reader, what comes across is the powerful experience of being a mother and how much you just did absolutely everything you could to be there for Mia. So it's really, it's remarkable that, I'm glad that the writing process gave you some insight into that as well.
Yeah, but I think it also, the writing process gave me permission to realize that I can't do that all the time. Like, I can't be there for her. But I think I always felt like I was never enough for her, and I could never be enough. And so I tried and tried and tried to be there for her as much as I could. But I think in realizing that that's not a failure on my part, I also realized that it's okay to give myself permission to not be enough for her. Because as one person, like, and she's, you know, almost 12 now, like, there's no way that I can be everything. So I've learned to ask for help with that, like making sure that she has people in her life that she can talk to and bounce off of and depend on more than just me, because I can't be there every moment of the day.
No, and that part read as universal to me, right? So I'm a mother and I have a daughter similar age, and even though I've had a much easier go of it than you, and I had my child surrounded by help in different ways, there's just a part of that in being a mom, of wanting to give your child everything and knowing you can't. They'll ultimately have to rely on others and rely on themselves. But say more about why it's so hard to ask for help. You wrote something in the book, and you mentioned this earlier in our conversation as well, but there was a piece in the book I wanted to make sure to ask you about, the idea that that asking for help is hard. And at some point you wrote that it always seemed as though there were plenty of people who would need help more than you did. So that's a barrier to going to ask. Mm-hmm. But, and some of it obviously is that our system makes it really hard for people to ask for help in the ways that you've described. But why do you think it's so hard to ask for help?
I mean, you're kind of told not to, over and over and over again, through social media, through people talking about welfare recipients needing drug tests, or, you know, trying to shame people. You know, there's the narrative of the welfare queen, or sitting on the couch eating bonbons all day, or like all of these little taglines that we associate with people receiving government assistance. And so it really seems like the general consensus is like, we're taking advantage of the system and we shouldn't be, because we're not working hard enough. And it goes back to, you know, the American myth of, if you work hard, then you'll make it in this country. And that's just simply not true anymore. I mean, the wages, the healthcare system, like, there is not enough to support the average worker, and housing costs. I mean, there's so many things. But I felt like not only was I a failure, but something inside of me was, you know, looking at my clients who were the same age as me, I felt like that was a failure on my part, that I wasn't in a house that big because I hadn't worked hard enough. I didn't know about like all of these invisible cushions that people have, like parents who will put them through college, or help them with the down payment on the house, or take care of their kids, or there's so many things that I didn't even know about. Right. That, but to me, it was just like, I'm just not working hard enough. Like, because I was told to work over and over again.
Right. And there's so much that's invisible about how we all receive government help, right? So if you grow up in a safer neighborhood, you're essentially benefiting from government help, right? And right from the get-go, your life is easier because you have less stress. But we never really connect that as being government help, right? We don't think of it as government help till you have to fill out a form to get it.
Yeah.
And yet we're all getting different versions of it.
Yeah. Or in those situations, those people are entitled to that help because they have worked hard, because they have made it. And a lot of the times it's not because of how much more work they're doing. It's just because they had a different starting point. And so we're okay with giving to people who deserve it, but not to people who are truly struggling because we think that they're not working.
Yes, exactly. And yet you managed to describe the houses you cleaned with so much empathy, right? And in a lot of ways you tell your story through telling the story of these other people who sometimes you don't even know, but you do know because you've seen everything in their homes. Can you share one of the stories from a house that you felt like made an impression on you that you've carried with you?
Boy, there's so many.
Yeah.
Well, I think I didn't realize that there was a possibility for sadness or stress or illness or anything if you had a house that big. Like, because I figured that you would have the ability to see a doctor, you'd be able to see a therapist, you'd go to the gym. Like, I just thought, like, when you have everything, then life could do you no wrong as far as, like, the little stressors, like a cold or like a sinus infection. And there was one house in particular, I call it the porn house in the book, for reasons that you can imagine. But they were constantly sick, and they were. It seemed like they were hardly ever home, and I think that left an impression on me. Because for me, it was just like, how can you have a sinus infection? Like, couldn't you just like go to the doctor? And I mean, they had, because they had antibiotics and all these medications all over the place. But I always associated Mia and I being sick because we lived in horrible housing conditions that made us that way, or that I was working all the time, or that she was in a really bad daycare. So I don't know, that was one thing that kind of left an impression on me, I think the most.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, there are others too, but realizing that people in nice houses could get a cold was a big one for me.
Right, and it seemed like there was also not only were they physically ill, but they were emotionally not necessarily well, right? You tell the story of their house as a story of a relationship that's broken, right? When you talk about them, essentially the two partners not living in the same room.
Yeah, they slept in separate places, at least some of the time, and I don't know if in that house particularly, but I saw a lot of prescriptions for antidepressants and anti-anxiety or sleep aids or things like that. And for me, naively, I thought that was another thing that wouldn't touch you if you were happy and wealthy or at least much better off than I was. Not in a way to shame mental illness or anything like that. But for me, it was just another thing, a lot like the common cold, that I thought wouldn't touch people in those situations.
Right. We tend to think that material comfort will insulate us from so much that in fact is just part of the human condition or needs other help.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was surprising to see a lot of prescription bottles and a lot of aids to help get through the day.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of anonymity. That was what was also very surprising to me. I mean, you started our conversation by pointing out the loneliness of that year, or that period of time, and the sort of being surrounded, just the sort of the constant aloneness of being in somebody's house and taking care of their house, but then never seeing them, and going from there to school and then to homework. Do you think that loneliness is often a part of, like, how much should we generalize from your experience? Is loneliness a big part of of the experience of poverty.
C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast.
I think so. I think it's incredibly isolating. I think many people do that as a defense mechanism for themselves. The further they feel away from that situation or the possibility of it ever happening, and kind of disassociate themselves with anything similar, the less they believe that that could ever happen to them. And so I think that's where a lot of the social stigmas come from, like the using food stamps, or the scene in the book where I'm using the WIC checks and upset everyone around me because I wanted a special kind of milk or something. You know, you feel that on a daily basis. You feel how upset people are with you because they, again, feel like you don't deserve it, or you're taking advantage, you're using their hard-earned tax money, or the money that they put towards taxes. Like I was personally using that to buy candy for my kid's stocking or something like that. There's a lot of that. And so you do kind of want to hide, and you don't want to project out there that you're struggling because it comes with all of those stigmas and prejudices.
Right. And it seems to me like that clearly compounds the challenges then also, because you write about it in some very practical ways. You shopped at odd hours, right? So it compounds the problem in very specific, tangible ways, but it also, then you also wrote about the trauma that you need to recover from, and the sort of emotional pain of that adds to all of the other pains that you need to work through.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't feel like I was a contributing member of society, but I started to get the feeling that I was in the dregs of society, like someone who shouldn't even exist, really.
Right.
And cleaning houses went along with that too. I mean, I felt like I was invisible at work. I was creating a situation where they couldn't even tell that I had been there, except for the place was a little cleaner and smelled nice. So I was constantly reminded of my invisibility.
Yeah. You know, and it's something I think it's worth hearing from you about the moments of kindness also, right? I think those of us who haven't had that experience but want to be able to be helpful and supportive and generous of spirit with people who are struggling don't always know how to step out and do that. But you did have some moments where people were, if not maybe as helpful as you might have needed them to be, at least did really treat you as somebody that they saw, right?
Yeah.
And talk more about some of those moments and what those mean for you, or meant for you in that time.
To me, it was someone treating me like a human being, a fellow human being,
Right.
someone who was like them, and were able to empathize with my situation and see that even a box of donuts was a huge treat for me and would make my kid really happy, and it wasn't something that I would necessarily get for myself. So I had a lot of moments like that where it wasn't necessarily, I know you're having a really hard time and you wouldn't be able to get this anyway, but here, it was just a quiet, left for me on the counter, or I even had a client once give Mia hand-me-down bicycles and scooters, and it was great. It was just take them if you need them. If you don't, I'm going to take them to Goodwill. Right. But I wouldn't have been able to afford those things otherwise. And I didn't need to come out and say that, but it was still really nice just to have that gift.
Right. And there's a beautiful passage that you write about a snowstorm, and you and Mia trekking through the snowstorm for a sled.
Yeah. Yeah. That took all day. It was 3 blocks, but the snow was up to Mia's waist pretty much. So it made for a really fun adventure and a really fun day, and we got a sled. So.
Yeah, exactly. And your bond with each other comes through in that story, and that, like, you know, we've all had those moments of like, well, if we have live on someplace where there's winter, you have these moments where you have a small child who's willing to bundle up and go into the snow, and yet it's a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
And both fun to bundle up and enjoy the storm when you get back, and also, you know, just a moment of quiet in an otherwise challenging life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was when I decided to really start focusing on my writing as well. And the writing at that time was an online journal that I had. And I think that day is what those moments that I had, those like moments of connection with her. And I knew that if I didn't record those in some way, they would eventually like drift away into like the outskirts of my memory. So that became a meditative process, I think. Not only striving to have those moments and striving to have something to write about in the 10 minutes a day that I was trying to keep myself accountable to, but also just in focusing on that time period or that activity or just that connection that I had with her. Because my life was so chaotic and everything felt like it was swirling around me all the time. So I think having those moments with her kept me centered and present.
Yeah, and didn't you, there was something that I'm not remembering well, unfortunately. Didn't you change the title of your online journal at that point?
Yeah. I think I had it as like drama as literature for a long time. It was some class that I saw that the title of it was funny. But yeah, I changed it to Still Life with Mia. And it stayed that way for quite a while.
And was that blog available, just it was out there, public?
Yeah. I took down most of the posts, or made them private, so that they're not public anymore. I did that when I started taking writing seriously in college, because I thought, like, a real writer doesn't have a blog. Or so I kind of like hid that and pretended that it never happened. But then it, you know, as my freelancing career was starting, I started writing entries for it again, just to have some proof of my writing somewhere.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but Still Life with Mia, like it is really evocative, that moment in the book when you talk about that it was a shift for you mentally of like, I'm going to embrace the positive moments that are here and that'll fuel me forward.
Yeah.
That's how it comes across anyway.
Yeah. They weren't always positive moments, but
Fair
they
enough.
were moments, I don't know, I want to say like primal, or, you know, just like the mother-daughter connection or mother-child connection that only you can have with your offspring. So there, you know, there were moments of hardship too, and struggling and wants, but there were some positive ones too.
Yeah. I appreciate you making that clarification. And that is how it comes across in the book. More about this innate, almost very difficult to put into words, bond.
Yeah. I mean, Mia's a very strong-willed, stubborn, very incredibly smart child, and she has been that way since she was born. I mean, I had to stay 2 steps in front of her mentally almost all the time, or she would just school me. And that's hard when you're stressed and you're tired and you're exhausted and just cannot, you know, read another story at 8:30 at night. So yeah, she was a, I don't want to say handful, but she was a challenge.
Right, pushed you in all the ways that kids can do.
Yeah.
And has she read the book?
She has not. She read a chapter of it. I had a conversation with her before I left for New York, because because I had originally told her that once the book was out that she could read it. And now I'm going to be gone for the next month, so she has to wait a little bit longer. But I kind of want to be there with her to answer any questions. There's a lot of stuff in the book, especially about my relationship with her dad, that could possibly change her relationship with her dad, or change her relationship with herself, or make her feel a little less valued. And so I want to be there, not only to reassure her, but just to answer any questions she might have. Right. But I can imagine it's also going to be really weird for her to read a story about her that she didn't write. So I tried to be really mindful of that in writing the book. I didn't want to turn it into her story, because that's not something that I can tell. But I mean, there's a lot of things in there that she might be embarrassed for someone to read when she's, 17 or 18 years old, or dating, or I don't know. And I hope she likes it.
Oh, I'm sure. And she's at that age too, of where everything's self-conscious anyway, like entering into a period of time where you're figuring out who you are.
Yeah, she's starting middle school next year, and I feel for her.
Yeah, exactly. Makes sense. But I'm glad we had a chance to talk about that piece, because this book comes across so much as a story of motherhood, and your relationship with her is really beautifully told in it.
Thank you.
We really have talked about all of the things that were on my mind as I was reading through this book, the ideas about empathy and how you maintain it, the ideas about how you maintain sort of, can't even use the word balance. Like, I think of this book as so much about your struggle and like maintaining a way to look forward, even as you are really stuck with having to balance so much in the present. I'm curious if there are other themes that you would want readers to take from this book that you want to make sure that we can talk about here.
Well, I mean, really, I hope the book creates an air of compassion, and it's a timely story in that way, just because things in this country have gotten so much worse that people can empathize, because my story is getting a little closer to home for a lot of people, especially with the government shutdown right now, and people struggling because they're not getting paid. I think I hope my story allows a million other stories to be told. I hope that the book grabs people's attention, and not only gets their attention, but gets them to listen, because I am a white person from a privileged background, and so my story is that way. So, so my story is in that category, but I would love to see more come out from more adverse situations, and I would hope that people listen to those.
Yeah, absolutely, as would I. And, and I also think there is a commonality here. I think it's really valuable to be able to see that somebody who, as you describe, is white and starts out in a suburban life can end up here. So can any of us, right? But for any number of things that go right or wrong in our life, and to be able to make that point in a broad way, I feel like is very powerful, and hopefully can help to help people to see themselves in the stories they read in the newspaper about the government shutdown, for example.
Yeah. I think definitely. The more people realize that it could happen to anybody, like their neighbors or their aunts and uncles or nephews and nieces, people who are close to you, it's pretty easy to lose everything and to suddenly find yourself without a home. So I would hope that the more people are having to reach out for help, the more compassionate we feel towards people who have been asking for help for a very long time.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I think this is really a wonderful book, and I hope it does get all the attention that it deserves. Thanks for having this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Thanks for listening to this week's Afterwards podcast. If you are interested in podcasts about nonfiction books, listen to C-SPAN's Book Notes Plus podcast for interviews with authors and historians hosted by Brian Lamb.